A family getaway to a cabin in the woods. But we weren't alone. It was supposed to be a peaceful escape. Just my family and I, deep in the woods, away from the noise of the city. But the moment we arrived, something felt off. The silence was too deep, the shadows seemed to move, and then things started happening. We thought we were alone. We were wrong. Want to hear the full story? Hit that subscribe button and join me, MR.Quentin, for more thrilling adventures. Don't forget to like the video and turn on notifications. You won't want to miss what happens next. The cabin stands weathered and rustic, nestled deep within a forest of towering evergreens. A crisp, woodsy scent lingers in the air as we step out of the car, the crunch of gravel beneath our feet, the only sound. "Can I go explore?" asks Ethan, the younger of my two children, his eyes alight with excitement. His older sister, Sophie, scans the dense tree line, a quiet curiosity flickering in her gaze. "We'll explore after we unpack," I say, hoping to teach them a little patience. My wife, Claire, is already entranced by the charm of the place, her fingers trailing along the aged wooden railing of the porch. "It's perfect," she murmurs, slipping her hand into mine. Once everything is settled inside, we finally set off into the woods. Ethan is the first to discover a small, crystal-clear creek where we splash and laugh, cool water trickling between our fingers. Sophie, ever the little planner, busies herself collecting twigs and fallen branches for the evening fire. By the time we return to the cabin, exhaustion tugs at our limbs, but contentment settles just as deeply. The scent of aged timber fills the space, stirring something nostalgic in me, a reminder of my own childhood summers. As the fire crackles in the stone hearth, its flickering glow dancing against the walls, we sit together, making simple sandwiches for dinner, the warmth of the flames, the hushed murmur of the forest outside. It feels like a world all our own. Later, Claire and I tuck the kids in, listening to their muffled giggles and whispers about the day's adventures. The night is peaceful, until we hear it. The night settles over the cabin in a thick hush, broken only by the whispering wind through the trees and the distant call of an owl. The warmth of the fire flickers in the hearth, casting long, shifting shadows along the wooden walls. Claire and I sit together on the worn couch, her head resting against my shoulder, while Ethan and Sophie, exhausted from the day's adventures, sleep soundly in their shared bedroom. For the first time in what feels like forever, there is peace, real, tangible peace. And then I hear it, a slow, deliberate creak from above. At first I think I've imagined it. The cabin is old after all. Old wood settles, bends, breathes. But then, another step, and another. A steady, rhythmic sound, as if someone, something, is moving across the loft above us. Claire stiffens beside me, her fingers tightening around my arm. "Did you hear that?" she whispers, her voice barely audible over the crackling fire. I swallow hard. "Probably just animals," I say, though even as the words leave my mouth, I know they're a lie. The sound is too measured, too deliberate. A sudden slam jolts both of us. The children's bedroom door bursts open. Ethan and Sophie come barreling out, their faces pale, eyes wide with fear. "Daddy, what's that noise?" Ethan whispers, his small frame trembling. I kneel down, wrapping an arm around him, hoping to mask my own unease. "Just animals, bud," I reassure him. But Sophie, ever observant, ever skeptical, shakes her head. "That's not animals," she says, her voice tight. I exchange a glance with Claire. There's no use pretending now. We gather in the living room, pulling blankets and couch cushions together, forming a makeshift sleeping space in the center of the room. It's instinct, I realize. Something primal in me that says to stay together, to stay close. The fire crackles low, its warmth doing little to dispel the chill creeping into my bones. The footsteps continue. They pace, slow and steady, above us, pressing against my chest like an unseen weight. Each step resonates through the cabin, as if whatever is up there knows we're listening, knows we're afraid. Ethan curls into Claire's side, his breath coming in small, uneven puffs. Sophie clutches my hand, her grip firm as though she's anchoring herself to reality. Claire's eyes remain locked on the ceiling, her face tight with tension. Sleep does not come easily. When I do finally drift off, strange, fevered dreams take hold. I see shadows moving through the trees, figures just beyond my reach, whispering in voices I cannot understand. I see the cabin, but not as it is now, as it once was, long before us, its walls newer, unstained by time. I see a man standing in the loft above, his back to me, unmoving. He turns, slowly, his face obscured by darkness, and though I cannot see I jolt awake, my heart hammering against my ribs. The fire has burned low, leaving only faintly glowing embers. The room is silent now. The footsteps have stopped. And yet, the unease lingers, thick and suffocating. I glance toward the loft. It is nothing but shadow. Claire shifts beside me, still awake. She doesn't say anything, but she doesn't have to. We both feel it. Something is here. Something that never left. Sunlight spills through the cabin windows, casting long golden beams across the wooden floor. For a moment, the warmth of morning makes the previous night feel distant, like a bad dream dissipating with the dawn. The fire has long since died, and the faint scent of charred wood lingers in the air. I stretch stiffly, my back aching from a restless night on the floor. Claire is already up, moving quietly around the small kitchen, her hands steadying the coffee pot, though her expression remains tense. She slept, but not well. I can tell by the dark smudges under her eyes. At the table, Ethan picks absently at his toast, his usual morning energy noticeably absent. Sophie stirs her oatmeal but doesn't eat. There's a heaviness in the air, something unspoken passing between us like a ghost in the room. Finally, Ethan breaks the silence. "Do you think it was just animals on the roof?" he asks hesitantly, his voice small. Claire and I exchange a glance. I want to say yes, to offer some logical explanation that will make him feel safe again, but Sophie, ever sharp, doesn't give me the chance. "That didn't sound like any animal," she says firmly, her brow furrowed. "It sounded like—" She pauses, searching for the right words. "Like someone walking." Claire places a reassuring hand on her shoulder, forcing a smile. "It's an old cabin. It creaks and settles. Maybe it was just the wind moving through the rafters." Sophie doesn't look convinced. Neither am I. We do our best to move past the unease, spending the day outdoors. The fresh air helps, if only temporarily. We hike through winding forest trails, the crunch of leaves underfoot grounding us. Ethan's mood lightens when we find a shallow stream, and he eagerly wades in, searching for smooth stones to skip across the surface. We fish by the lake, the sun warming our skin, and for the first time since we arrived, we laugh freely. We lay out a picnic on a patch of soft grass, and for a little while, things feel normal again. But normalcy is fragile. As the sun begins its descent, stretching shadows through the trees, that same familiar unease creeps back in. It slithers into my chest, settling deep. By the time we return to the cabin, dusk has painted the sky in hues of violet and gold. The air is cooler now, the stillness of the forest unnerving. The cabin looms ahead, unchanged yet somehow different, as if the walls themselves are watching. We try to shake off the feeling, lighting the fire early and preparing a simple dinner. But the conversation is subdued, our voices quieter than before. Even Ethan, usually a chatterbox, eats in silence. Nightfall descends, and then the tapping begins. A soft, rhythmic sound. Tap, Tap, tap. At first, I think it's coming from outside, perhaps a tree branch against the cabin. But as I listen, my stomach knots. It's coming from the loft above us, the same place where the footsteps echoed last night. Claire stiffens, her hand gripping the edge of the table. Sophie sets down her spoon carefully, her face pale. Ethan scoots closer to his mother, his small fingers curling into the fabric of her sweater. I force myself to stay calm. Probably just the wind, I say, standing, though my legs feel heavy. Tap, tap, tap. I take a slow step toward the loft ladder, my pulse pounding in my ears. Each step creaks beneath my weight as I climb. The air grows colder, the shadows darker. I reach the top. Nothing. Just the small, empty space. Dust floating in the moonlight filtering through the window. I scan the floorboards, looking for signs of animals, maybe a stray branch knocked loose by the wind. But there's nothing out of place. Nothing that explains the sound. Still, the unease lingers, tightening around my ribs like an invisible grip. I descend carefully, forcing a casual expression for the sake of my family. Probably just the old wood shifting, I say lightly. No one believes me. We once again gather in the living room, dragging the blankets close. The fire crackles, casting flickering light against the walls. The tapping has stopped, but the silence it leaves behind is worse. I lie awake long after the others have drifted into uneasy sleep, staring at the ceiling, listening, waiting. I don't know for what, but I know it's coming. The fire has burned low, its once bright flames now flickering weakly against the encroaching darkness. Shadows stretch along the cabin walls, moving with a life of their own. The air is thick, heavy with an unnatural stillness, and then tap, tap, tap. Soft at first, almost delicate. But then it grows louder, more insistent, an unrelenting rhythm that seems to move around us, circling, testing. Claire stiffens beside me, her breath caught in her throat. Across the room, Ethan clutches his blanket tightly, his knuckles turning white. Sophie, rigid with tension, stares toward the ceiling, as if expecting something, someone, to step through it. The tapping continues, shifting from the loft above to the walls around us. My skin prickles. This isn't the groaning of an old cabin settling. It isn't the wind. Something is here. The fire's flickering, Ethan whispers, his voice barely above a breath. I glance toward the fireplace. He's right. The flames, which moments ago danced steadily, now tremble, shrinking as if struggling against an unseen force. The lantern on the table dims, its glow weakening, casting longer, twisting shadows. A chill sweeps through the room. Sophie suddenly gasps, her hand flying up, pointing toward the window. There's a face! We turn as one, hearts hammering. But there's nothing, just the reflection of the fire against the darkened glass. The trees outside sway gently in the wind, their branches skeletal against the night sky. Claire forces out a shaky laugh. Probably just our reflection, she says, though her voice lacks conviction. Let's do something to take our minds off things. A game, maybe? I nod, seizing the suggestion. Yeah, a game. Anything to break this suffocating tension. But before we can even move, click. The unmistakable sound of a lock turning. And then, the front door swings open. A rush of cold air surges into the cabin, snuffing out what little warmth remains. The lantern flickers wildly before steadying, its light now pale and feeble. I rise instinctively, my heart thundering. No one moves. No one breathes. The open doorway yawns before us, revealing nothing but darkness beyond the threshold. No footsteps, no sound, no wind. Just silence. The kind that feels wrong. Claire's hand tightens around mine, her nails digging into my skin. I take a cautious step forward, peering outside. The porch is empty. The trees are still. There's no sign of anyone or anything that could have done this. And yet, I glance down. The wooden floor just beyond the doorway is damp. Wet footprints, irregular and smeared, trail inside as if someone or something had walked through the cabin. I follow them with my eyes, my breath turning shallow. They lead across the living room, past the smoldering embers of the fireplace, and straight to the children's room. A sick feeling twists in my gut. We need to stick together, I say, my voice low but firm. Ethan and Sophie press close to Claire as I grab the lantern, its weak light flickering in my grasp. Slowly, cautiously, we make our way toward the children's room, each step heavy with dread. The wooden floor creaks beneath us, the only sound in the otherwise suffocating silence. The door stands ajar, just enough to see inside. I push it open. The room is empty, but the window, it's wide open. A sharp gust of wind rushes through, sending the curtains billowing. The cold bites at my skin, far too frigid for a night like this. My pulse pounds in my ears as I step closer. The footprints end here, just beneath the window. Whoever, or whatever, came in, never left. I scan the corners of the room, the shadows, the ceiling. There's nowhere to hide, yet the suffocating sense of presence remains, wrapping around my throat like invisible fingers. Claire exhales shakily. We need to go. She's right. We don't belong here. I move to shut the window, but as I reach for it, a whisper, a breath of sound just behind me. Not words, not quite, but a presence. I spin, lantern held high. Nothing. Only my family, standing in the doorway, their eyes wide with fear. I lock the window, pulling the curtains closed, though it does little to shake the deep, gnawing unease curling in my chest. Back in the living room, we huddle together by the dimming fire, wrapped in blankets. But warmth is a distant memory. No one sleeps. The night stretches long, thick with silence. Waiting, listening. Morning arrives, but it brings no comfort. The fire has long since died, leaving only cold ash in the hearth. None of us slept. Not really. We spent the night listening, waiting, our bodies too tense to surrender to exhaustion. The tapping had stopped. The whispers had faded. But the air inside the cabin remained heavy, thick with something unseen, something watching. We need to leave. Claire and I don't say it outright, but we exchange a look over the dim morning light, and it's understood. Whatever is happening here, whatever presence lingers in the walls, in the shadows, in the air we breathe, it wants us here, and we cannot stay. We gather our things quickly, stuffing them into bags without care. Ethan and Sophie move with uncharacteristic quiet, the weight of the night before still pressing down on them. The children say nothing, but I can see it in their faces. They feel it too. By the time we step outside, the forest is bathed in pale morning light. The air is crisp, cool against our skin. But something is wrong. Terribly wrong. It takes a moment to notice. The sheer unnaturalness of it makes my brain hesitate, trying to explain it away before accepting what it knows to be true. The silence. Complete. Absolute. The usual morning chorus of birdsong is absent. No chirping, no rustling of small creatures darting through the underbrush, no buzzing insects, no sound of wind through the trees. Nothing, just the unnatural, suffocating quiet. Ethan is the first to speak, his small voice uneasy. Why aren't the birds singing? I glance at Claire, her lips pressed together, but she doesn't answer. There's not even a squirrel, Sophie murmurs. She's right. The woods should be alive with movement. Squirrels chasing each other up the trees, birds fluttering between branches, the occasional deer grazing in the distance. But there is nothing, no sign of life, as if the forest itself is holding its breath. A new kind of fear coils in my stomach, different from the terror of the night before. That was fear of something we could hear, could feel pressing in around us. This question mark, this is the fear of what is missing. Claire grips my hand. Let's go. We start walking, following the dirt path that leads back to where we parked the car. Our footsteps crunch against the ground, the only sound in the otherwise soundless world. The trees tower around us, their branches stretching toward the sky, their trunks ancient and unyielding. I don't know how long we walk, but it's long enough that the unease grows unbearable. My grip tightens on Ethan's small hand, pulling him along just a little faster. And then we see it, the cabin, directly in front of us. We stop. A sharp, cold dread rushes through my veins. How? Claire's voice is barely a whisper. How is this possible? I turn, looking back at the path we just walked. The same path we've taken before, the one that should have led us away, but we are back, right where we started. Ethan lets out a small whimper, and Sophie grips my sleeve, her nails digging into my arm. We walked straight, she stammers. We didn't turn, we didn't. I look up at the sky, at the treetops, at the position of the sun. We did walk straight. We should be miles away from here by now, and yet. The cabin stands before us, unchanged, waiting. I exhale, forcing down the panic rising in my throat. There has to be an explanation. Maybe we got turned around without realizing it. Maybe. No, this isn't natural. Claire grabs my arm. Her fingers are ice cold. We're trapped. The words hang in the air, undeniable. A whisper of wind rushes through the trees, making the leaves shudder, the first sound we've heard in hours. And though I can't explain why, I know we are not alone. The cabin is no longer a refuge. It is a prison. After our failed attempt to leave, the weight of our reality sinks in. We are trapped. Whether by something supernatural or by some force we cannot yet understand, the forest will not let us go. We return inside, locking the door behind us as if that flimsy barrier could truly keep it out. I move through the cabin quickly, checking the windows, peering out into the fading daylight. But the forest is just as it was before, silent, empty, waiting. Claire's hands shake as she helps Sophie push a chair against the door. It feels ridiculous, useless, but we do it anyway. We drag furniture in front of the entrances, wedge a metal poker under the doorknob. I find an old hunting knife in a drawer and grip it tightly, though I have no idea if a weapon like this would even matter against something like this. Ethan clutches a heavy flashlight, his small hands white-knuckled around the handle. Sophie carries a fire poker, holding it like a sword. Claire stands close to them, her breathing steady, but forced. She's trying not to let them see how terrified she is. Darkness creeps in faster than it should. The sun barely sets before the cabin is swallowed by shadow. The firelight flickers weakly, struggling to hold back the overwhelming blackness outside the windows. We sit together in the center of the room, backs to one another, weapons clutched tight. And then, tap, tap, tap. It's back. The sound is slow at first, hesitant, as if testing our reactions. It moves along the walls, shifting from one side of the cabin to the other. Then, something new. Laughter. Soft, distant, but undeniably human. A slow, creeping chuckle that seeps into my bones, making my skin crawl. It rises and falls in waves, as if many voices are laughing together, amused at our fear. Ethan buries his face in Claire's side, trembling. Sophie grips my arm, and then, the scraping. A slow, deliberate drag of something sharp against the wooden walls, moving steadily around the perimeter of the cabin. It stops, starts again on another side, then another, encircling us. We huddle closer, my grip tightens on the knife. I can feel the cold sweat on my neck, the way the hair on my arms stands on end. We are being hunted. "Daddy," Ethan whispers, his voice barely audible over the sounds outside. And then he stiffens. His eyes go wide. His small hand shoots up, pointing. "Look!" My stomach drops. I follow his gaze to the window, and I see them. Dozens of faces stare back at us, pale, hollow-eyed, motionless, their expressions vacant, their mouths slightly parted as if caught mid-breath. Some press against the glass, others stand farther back, barely visible in the gloom. The fire flickers, the light shifting, and in that instant, they vanish, like they were never there. A breath of silence. Then, from just beyond the walls, the laughter returns. Louder this time, closer. It's going to be a long night. By morning, exhaustion has hollowed us out. None of us slept. None of us even dared to close our eyes. The fire burned low, our makeshift barricades remained untouched. And yet, the thing outside had never truly left. It had watched. It had waited. And now, we had to go. "We can't stay here," I say, voice hoarse from a night of whispered reassurances and swallowed fear. "We need to find someone. Another cabin, a road, anything." Claire nods, dark circles smudging beneath her eyes. Ethan clings to her side, too tired to ask questions. Sophie sits stiffly, gripping the fire poker like it's the only thing anchoring her to reality. We don't take time to eat. There's no hunger, no room for anything except the raw need to leave. Before stepping into the forest, I grab an old tattered shirt from my bag and tear it into strips. "We'll mark the trees," I tell them. "That way, we won't walk in circles." Claire takes a strip, then Sophie. We tie them to branches, pressing forward through the silent woods. No birds, no rustling of animals, no wind, just our own breathing. Hours pass. The trees stretch endlessly in every direction, their skeletal limbs clawing at the sky. Every few minutes, I glance back, half expecting to see those faces again, watching. But there is nothing. Still, the feeling never fades. Something is here. Something is waiting. Just as I begin to fear we've been walking in vain, Sophie's voice cuts through the stillness. "A road!" I snap my head up. And there it is. A break in the trees. A narrow, cracked pavement road. Relief rushes through me, so powerful it nearly knocks me off balance. Claire lets out a choked breath. Ethan sags against her, too exhausted to celebrate. For the first time in days, hope flutters inside me, but it is short-lived. A howl splits the air, deep, low, wrong. It doesn't belong to any animal I know. It's guttural, angry, filled with something that is not hunger, not rage, but something far worse. Possession. The sound is close, too close. Then, movement. Shadows dart between the trees, barely visible but fast, too fast. Twisting through the underbrush, surrounding us. "Run!" I roar. We don't hesitate. We sprint for the road, branches whipping at our skin. The trees blur, the pounding of our feet barely masking the other footsteps behind us. Gaining. Ethan stumbles. Claire yanks him forward. Sophie gasps. A shape surges past us in the trees, its limbs jerking at unnatural angles. A flash of pale skin, hollow eyes. The howling grows deafening, and then, headlights. A pair of glowing beams cut through the fog, illuminating the road just ahead. A truck. It screeches to a stop, tires skidding against the pavement. The driver's side door flies open, and a man steps out. Middle-aged, grizzled, his flannel shirt unbuttoned at the collar. But it's his eyes that stop me cold. They're already scanning the woods, as if he knows, as if he's seen this before. "Need a lift?" he asks, voice calm but urgent. For a single, horrifying second, I hesitate, because something inside me knows, if we don't get in now, we never will. I grab Ethan, practically throwing him into the truck. Claire and Sophie scramble in behind him. I dive in last, slamming the door. The truck roars to life. The man doesn't wait. He floors it, the tires spinning before catching traction, sending us flying down the road. Through the rear window, I watch the forest shrink behind us. The shadows stop at the edge of the trees. They don't follow. They never leave the forest. The pale faces are gone, but deep down, I know the truth. They are still watching,